What does radon tend to cause?
It causes lung cancer.
That's exactly why all Minnesota schools are recommended to test for radon. But a new KARE 11 investigation finds that's not happening. So which schools are testing, which are not? Here's investigative reporter AJ Legault with Radon Roulette.
Mom, you read.
I will.
They're moments parents wish they could hold on to forever.
I think that your mama must be a
Swan.
Rachel Momberg is just months away from letting go, just a bit, sending her daughter Harper off to kindergarten. But before that happens, she has questions for her school district.
Show me the valid proof. Show me that you tested.
Testing scores. Not math and reading, but radon, the radioactive gas that occurs naturally in the soil and enters buildings like homes and schools through cracks and openings in walls or foundations, often accumulating at unsafe levels. Odorless, colorless, and tasteless, the CDC says radon is the #1 cause of lung cancer among non-smokers, responsible for an estimated 20,000 deaths each year.
And so as a parent, my first thought is, how do I protect my daughter?
At the University of Minnesota, Professor Bill Angel is one of the leading national experts on radon, literally writing the training manual on testing and simple mitigation procedures to reduce the risk.
All parents should test their homes as well as expect their schools to test for radon.
Parents should expect the schools to be testing?
Absolutely. It's been a recommendation that's been around for 25 years.
Rachel has more reason than most to expect her daughter's classroom be radon tested.
Right here, that this is the mass in my lung, and it metastasized to my lymph nodes in my brain.
Rachel has lung cancer.
1% of people who are diagnosed with my type of disease at my stage make it 5 years.
The 32-year-old mom never smoked and was a high-level athlete, playing hockey for the Golden Gophers, even playing for Team USA. She's now a long shot to see her little girl graduate high school.
I'm planning to be here. I'm going to be that 1%. But if I am or not, at least she knows that I did everything I can to positively influence other people.
There is no way to prove exactly what caused Rachel's cancer, but radon is the chief suspect, and she's become an advocate for increased testing and awareness. Because in Minnesota, nearly 80% of counties are rated as radon hot zones.
It is a big public health concern.
Dan Tranter with the Minnesota Department of Health says both his agency and the EPA recommend schools test every ground-level classroom at least once every 5 years.
When you look at the numbers of cancer deaths attributed to radon exposure, I think the numbers are staggering.
So KARE 11 Investigates wanted to know how many schools in our state are following those recommendations to protect kids and teachers from unnecessary exposure to the cancer-causing gas. The answer was not very many.
In Minnesota, there are 331 school districts. But state health department data obtained by KARE 11 reveals since 2012, only 53 districts have reported doing radon testing.
Yeah, I'm shocked. I'm really, really shocked and surprised, and that's unacceptable.
Which schools are testing and which are not? The health department refuses to release that information. So KARE 11 directly surveyed the 20 largest districts in the metro. Among our findings, most Minneapolis schools have not been radon tested in more than 20 years. 6 of the city's 42 elementary schools were tested last year, but only some rooms. Not every ground level room, like the health department recommends. In fact, records show it's the same story in at least 7 other metro school districts. Eden Prairie, Robbinsdale, South Washington County, Edina, Lakeville, Elk River, and Minnetonka also failed to test every ground level room.
Is that a problem?
It's a great problem because radon concentrations can vary from room to room, and you simply don't catch that when you are basically playing Russian roulette by testing only a fraction of the rooms in ground contact.
We've tested all of our buildings.
Some districts are following the health department radon recommendations, including St. Paul.
This was one building that had higher levels.
Jeff Connell, St. Paul's Assistant Director of Facilities, says Nokomis Montessori could be a case study on why schools should test every ground level room. When first tested in the late 90s, most of Nokomis had no issues. But because they tested every space, they discovered 2 kindergarten classrooms with dangerous radon levels that demanded they install a mitigation system.
I don't think there's a really good excuse for not getting this information about your buildings.
Even worse than not testing every room is not testing every school. In Edina, the high school, 2 middle and 2 elementary schools have not been tested in the last 5 years. Bloomington, Stillwater, and East Carver County schools haven't tested all their buildings either. Wayzata hasn't done any radon testing in the last 5 years.
It's a relief for me.
Rachel once taught in Duluth schools, so we asked for their radon results. They told us they've never tested.
It's irresponsible not to test for radon in schools.
Does that mean that there are schools where children are being exposed to this known carcinogen?
It's possible. It's unknown.
Unknown if a radioactive gas that is easily tested for and mitigated is in our kids' classrooms.
Why would we not protect them?
A fair question from a mom who wants her daughter and daughter's classmates to have the future she can no longer count on.
And this is my mama. The end. Good job.
Yay.
Now, we've created a database on KARE11.com of the 20 largest metro school districts where you can search to see if your kid's school has been tested according to health department guidelines. And as you can imagine, this report's already been creating a lot of buzz. Edina Schools sent out a statement to parents in advance of our report stating that they take all such claims seriously and are committed to future testing.
Okay. How much does it cost? And it's always a concern for school districts. Is this expensive?
It's not
and
super,
who's funding it?
It's not super expensive. Now, if you and I were to do it in our home, it only costs, $7, $10 to run out to the hardware store and buy one of these tests. Obviously, in a school, they're testing every room, so it does get to be more expensive. St. Paul tells me they budget about $180,000 for each 5-year round of testing, but because of the extreme health risk, it's just not an area where they're willing to skimp.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. Governor Dayton and lawmakers are responding tonight after watching a KARE11 investigation showing a majority of Minnesota schools are not testing for cancer-causing radon gas.
The governor's so outraged, he says if something isn't done to protect students and teachers, he may take executive action. Investigative reporter AJ Legault is here with new developments tonight. AJ?
Randy, Julie, our investigation started with a really simple question. Are Minnesota schools following state and federal guidelines for radon testing? The answers varied. Some districts do it by the books, but other schools are not testing at all, not testing often enough, and half the ones that are testing are not doing it properly. We found more than 80% of Minnesota schools are not testing for radon up to national standards. Is that acceptable?
No, it's not. To have some hidden killer like this and have a school district not even bother to test for it. It's just disgraceful.
No punches pulled by Governor Dayton today as he responded to KARE's investigation.
That was a shocking report.
Both the Minnesota Department of Health and Environmental Protection Agency recommend schools test every ground level classroom for radon at least once every 5 years. In Minnesota, there are 331 school districts, but state health department data obtained by KARE11 revealed since 2012, only 53 districts have reported doing radon testing. In Duluth, they've never tested. In Minneapolis, most schools have not been radon tested in more than 20 years.
I think it's very irresponsible, especially since we know that, again, radon is the number 2 source of lung cancer in our country and in Minnesota.
DFLer Karen Clark represents South Minneapolis. She showed up at our interview with cheap radon tests.
One that costs $12.
She'd bought on her way in.
We should be testing, and the fact that we're not is really important journalism that you help bring to us.
If the legislature can't act on it this session, I'll look to see what we can do by executive order or other means to get something in place that requires schools to do this until legislation can be passed.
Of course, with mandated testing, there is a cost. That's something lawmakers will now need to wrestle with, guys.
Well, last week it was the governor. Tonight, other lawmakers are responding to a KARE11 investigation introducing a bipartisan bill requiring schools to test for radon. The investigation exposed major gaps in how Minnesota schools test for the cancer-causing gas. Here's investigative reporter AJ Legault with the latest developments.
Radon gas is a silent killer.
The state says radon is a deadly threat.
Radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer.
Tax dollars have been spent creating public service announcements like this one. But a KARE 11 investigation found the state not following its own advice.
Disappointing and upsetting.
That's DFL State Senator Carla Bigham. Today, she, along with both Democratic and Republican lawmakers, introduced bipartisan legislation to require all school districts test for radon.
These are things that, as parents, you should expect.
Both the Minnesota Department of Health and Environmental Protection Agency recommend schools test every ground-level classroom for radon at least once every 5 years. In Minnesota, there are 331 school districts, but state health department data obtained by KARE 11 revealed since 2012, only 53 districts have reported doing radon testing.
To have some hidden killer like this and have a school district not even bother to test for it, it's just disgraceful.
And I think the governor said it very well, that he was very shocked as well and disappointed and upset about it. I am too. So we're going to do something about it.
Minnesota would not be the first state to mandate schools test for radon. We discovered these 4 states and the District of Columbia have the strongest radon testing laws. Rhode Island requires schools, daycare centers, and other public buildings be radon tested. Virginia also requires every school building be tested. D.C. says all public buildings, that would include schools, must be tested. Colorado requires all public and private schools be radon tested, and Oregon mandates schools test all frequently occupied ground-level rooms at least every 10 years. Although there's just 1 week left in Minnesota's legislative session, Senator Bigham says there is bipartisan commitment to pass the radon testing requirement for schools to ensure students and staff are safe.
It's a known carcinogen, and so we really have to make sure we're protecting the children and the staff.
Well, if passed, the plan would go into effect for the 2019 school year. And if you'd like to read the proposed legislation for yourself, we've put a link to it on KARE11.com.
They are running out of time at the session. Can they get it
1
through?
week. That's the big question. I've been told they think they can, but that's a process to go through here, and time is running out.
And any idea how much it would cost to mandate this?
That is a big question, and it's different for every school district. Some districts only have a couple schools. It isn't going to cost all that much. And we found actually schools that have found radon when they have tested, a bunch of them have been able to mitigate it for virtually no outside cost by just adjusting the air handling systems in a particular room, and that's fixed the problem by improving airflow. So if you test and find it, doesn't necessarily mean it costs a bunch of money to mitigate.
Fix it. Wow.
Yeah.
Great work.
All right. Well, new records show Minnesota school districts located in parts of the state with the highest radon levels are failing to test for the cancer-causing gas. This month, KARE 11 Investigates has been exposing major gaps in how Minnesota schools test for radon.
Our reporting to date has focused largely on metro area schools, but we wanted to know if schools in Minnesota's highest radon hotspots are doing a better job. Here's investigative reporter AJ Legault.
In Minnesota, 80% of counties are listed as radon hot zones, and these 8 counties are the worst of the worst. 75% of homes tested show radon levels above the Environmental Protection Agency's action level. Remediation is relatively simple and not that expensive, especially compared to the consequences of doing nothing.
Radon gas is a silent killer.
Dan Tranter is with the Minnesota Department of Health.
What does radon tend to cause?
It causes lung cancer. It's estimated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to cause over 21,000 lung cancer deaths per year in the United States alone.
State and federal guidelines call for schools to test every ground-level classroom for radon once every 5 years.
To test their buildings and to fix their buildings if they have a problem.
So we wanted to know if the 25 school districts located in these 8 counties with the highest radon levels in the state are properly testing. Here's what we learned. These 11 school districts report having done no testing in the last 5 years. Remember, checking for radon every 5 years is what the health department and EPA guidelines recommend. These 4 districts say they haven't tested their buildings in the last 15 years. And these 2 school districts, Russell-Tyler-Ruthven and Redwood area, could provide no record of ever being radon tested.
To have some hidden killer like this and have a school district not even bother to test for it. It's just disgraceful.
Well, since our first report on school radon testing, legislation was introduced to require schools to test, but time ran out to get that bill passed this legislative session. Governor Dayton vowed to take executive action if that happened. We'll let you know what he decides to do. Meanwhile, as further results come in from across the state, we're continuing to update our interactive map on KARE11.com, where you can look to see whether your kid's school has been properly radon tested.
And just to reiterate, you explained this in earlier reports, but the actual test itself is easy to do and inexpensive per classroom.
It's really easy to do. Now it's probably $7 to $12 per classroom. So if you got a lot of schools in a district, it can add up. St. Paul budgets about $180,000 for a full round of every classroom in every school over a 5-year period. So it can get a little pricey that way, but per room it's not that expensive, and half the time fixing it is simply a matter of changing the air handling system in that room.
All right, thank you, AJ.
Thank you, AJ.
Well, it's hard to believe, but we are just weeks away from kids heading back to school. In some cases, those schools have cancer-causing radon gas. In May, a KARE11 investigation found more than 80% of Minnesota schools were not following state and federal guidelines for radon testing. Tonight, an update on what's been happening over the summer to make sure our schools are safe. Investigative reporter AJ Legault has more on the findings in his investigation, Radon Roulette.
A failing grade. That's how KARE11 described what we found when, this past spring, we put Minnesota schools to the test. Governor Dayton was even harsher.
To have some hidden killer like this and have a school district not even bother to test for it. It's just disgraceful.
The hidden killer is radon. Such a health risk.
Radon gas is a silent killer.
The Minnesota Department of Health puts out PSAs like this.
Radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer.
The state wants you to test your home, but we found the state failing to ensure schools were following EPA and health department guidelines that call for testing every 5 years. Most Minneapolis schools had not been radon tested in more than 20 years. And we found other districts that had never tested.
84% of Minnesota school districts have reported doing no radon testing in the last 5 years. Is that accurate?
That does sound accurate.
Does that mean that there are schools where children are being exposed to this known carcinogen?
It's possible. It's unknown.
Lawmakers responded following that report, drafting a bill to mandate schools test for radon.
These are things that, as parents, you should expect.
But there were only days left in the legislative session, so it's on hold until next year. In the meantime, Governor Dayton vowed his administration would take action.
Until legislation can be passed.
The Commissioners of Health and Education issued a joint statement Friday describing steps underway this summer to improve safety by conducting proactive training sessions in school districts throughout the state. The latest health department data shows, since KARE11 first exposed the problem, 9 additional school districts reported testing. That testing revealed 10 buildings with elevated radon levels, and so far, 7 rooms have been mitigated. It's a start, but shows when it comes to radon in schools, the state has a long way to go before it can answer its own question.
Is your family safe?
That was AJ Legault reporting. Well, 80% of Minnesota counties are listed by the EPA as radon hot zones, and in some areas, 3 out of 4 homes tested come in above the action level.
A lawmaker is calling for action at the state capitol in response to a KARE11 investigation from earlier this year. It exposed more than 80% of Minnesota's schools were not following state and federal rules for testing for the cancer-causing gas, radon. AJ Legault tells us one state senator's plan in our ongoing investigation, Radon Roulette.
Radon gas is a silent killer.
Tax dollars have been spent creating public service announcements like this one, saying every home and building should be radon tested.
Radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer.
But when KARE11 put Minnesota schools to the test, they got a failing grade. More than 80% of school districts are not complying with state and federal guidelines to test for the cancer-causing gas every 5 years. Most Minneapolis schools had not been tested in more than 20 years. We found other districts that had never tested.
That's a problem, and we need to fix it.
DFL State Senator Carla Bigham says what KARE11 uncovered is unacceptable. especially given that 80% of Minnesota counties are listed by the EPA as radon hot zones.
And I was disappointed and upset that they weren't being tested for. I mean, this is a known carcinogen, and it was very disappointing that this wasn't being tested for.
Currently in Minnesota, there is no requirement that schools test for the radioactive gas. It's just a recommendation. The new bill, still sitting on Senator Bingham's desk, waiting to be filed, would mandate the testing be part of schools' already existing facilities maintenance plans. When it comes to testing for radon, the senator says no school should be left behind.
This is a very important subject. It's a carcinogen, and our schools, our parents, our students deserve to know that the buildings that they spend their days in are healthy.
Several other states already mandate radon testing in schools. If Minnesota lawmakers pass this reform, it would go into effect for the 2021 school session. At the Capitol, AJ Legault, KARE 11 News.